What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. The real story of alcohol's place in American history. It turns out that the wise man Homer Simpson was kind of right when he said that alcohol was the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. Alcohol isn't just a mostly overpriced social lubricant at best, and horribly destructive and addictive poison at worst. It actually played a huge role in the daily routine of almost every man, woman, and child in early America. The drinking habits in early America shaped the country into what it is today, for better or for worse. Take a look back in time with this list and check out all of the old laws, resourceful criminals, and fearless leaders that changed our boozy history. The Mayflower only landed on Plymouth Rock because they ran out of beer. Due to a lack of beer, the Mayflower only landed on Plymouth Rock. Photo. Bureau of Engraving and Printing, Wikimedia Commons, public domain. We're taught in school that the Pilgrims made the daring journey from England to America in search of ideological freedom and a fresh start that was free from political or religious tyranny, and that Plymouth Rock would be the metaphorical cornerstone upon which they built their bright new future. But it turns out they were just out of beer. The Pilgrims were originally supposed to land in New York, but they ran out of beer and needed some quickly, so they stopped in Massachusetts instead. Beer certainly helped folks pass the time on their 9-week Atlantic crossing, but they also used it for hydration, as beer was often safer than unpurified water. At the very least, that's what they probably told themselves when they made the decision to make a brief pit stop in Plymouth Rock, rather than traveling straight to New York. The fact that they even thought they were running low is still pretty insane, because the Mayflower was reportedly carrying 10,000 gallons of wine, in addition to a large supply of beer. Truly, it takes a special kind of person to look at 10,000 gallons of wine and say, what if we run out between Massachusetts and New York? Forget it, we're coming to an end here, and this is where we live right now. So that's why the Pilgrims landed on, settled, and eventually had the first Thanksgiving. We were simply out of beer. In the early days, there was no legal drinking age. At 21 years old, the drinking age in the United States is one of the highest in the world. It took effect in all states in 1984, after Ronald Reagan threatened to cut the federal highway budget of any state that didn't comply with the mandate. However, prior to Prohibition, the regulations were significantly looser. From 1776 to 1919, a year before the beginning of Prohibition, there was no set drinking age for the country as a whole. States set their own drinking ages, and 15 was a pretty common one. But most states didn't enforce a drinking age at all. Really, the concern with the drinking age is mostly related to drunk driving accidents. The reason the drinking age was changed from 18 to 21 was because there was an increase in drunk driving-related accidents in the 1960s and 1970s, the majority of which came from drivers under 20. But why were we letting so many young children drink beer way in the past? That brings us to our subsequent point. People drank beer for hydration because it was safer than water. A low-alcohol version of the popular hoppy beverage, known as small beer, was produced by George Washington. In the early days, alcohol was often consumed instead of water, since it couldn't harbor potentially harmful bacteria like water often did. People wisely trusted beer more than they did water. Beer that wasn't too strong was needed back in those days, since water was sometimes not drinkable, and the colonists and early Americans needed a substitute whistle wetter. The usual consumers of small beer were soldiers, paid servants, enslaved people, and male workers, usually of a lower class. George Washington's small beer recipe has been reproduced by many modern beer makers to get a taste of what drinking was like in colonial America. However, the practice of drinking them while working has not been revived in the United States. Colonists used alcohol to trick Native Americans. The Native Americans didn't have a strong drinking culture, and the new colonists knew this and unfortunately turned it to their advantage. In the early 1600s, colonists would ply Native Americans with alcohol to get the inexperienced Native Americans drunk to give the more experienced colonists the upper hand during a trade. This was all very abrupt for the Native Americans, and they could not adapt quickly enough to the new lifestyle that had been thrown upon them. Colonists began to judge the native people for their inability to handle alcohol, although the white settlers were just as rowdy, and in 1673, it even became illegal to sell a drink to a Native American. Essentially, colonists blamed the Native Americans for a problem they created themselves. It wasn't great. In the past, workers were compensated with alcohol. Additionally, you felt that your employer's benefits were poor. There are numerous reports of alcohol being used as a payment for workers in the 19th and early 20th centuries, commonly among lower-class workers, such as house servants and laborers, but the most famous example featuring alcohol as payment was for the builders of the Erie Canal. A daily wage of 50 cents and 32 ounces of whiskey, including a 2-ounce shot every morning at 6 in the morning before work, were paid to the mostly Irish labor force. The free-flowing alcohol led to a lot of violent fights, fun Irish drinking songs and, of course, the completion of the canal that helped turn New York into a leader in the growing global economy. And it was all done for 50 cents and 32 ounces of whiskey. What a bargain. There was a pre-Prohibition wine mega sale. It was time to take stock of the nation and slow down its aggressive drinking practices now that it had several decades of hard, unsupervised drinking under its belt. This led to the brief banning of alcohol in America known as Prohibition. In the years leading up to Prohibition, many winemakers realized they had to get rid of their products because they saw the signs. Leading winemakers of the period had the equivalent of 75 Olympic swimming pools of wine to offload before the law took effect. Americans stepped right up to the boozy plate and stocked up for the apocalypse. Over 141 million bottles of wine were sold within 3 months. Considering that a portion of the population was already supportive of the Prohibition movement, that was quite a lot of wine. A smart businessman named Horatio Lanza also bought a huge amount of wine, about 1.3 million gallons worth, and made quite a bit of money for himself during that period. We're not trying to force a second prohibition or anything, but summer barbecue season is coming up, so if the threat of another alcohol ban could drive down the prices of booze real quick, that would be really helpful. Carrie Nation, an anti-alcohol advocate, was amazing and terrifying. Carrie Nation was a Prohibition-era superhero, or a booze-hating supervillain, depending on how you feel about alcohol. In the late 1800s, the temperance movement Nation was one of the most influential voices. Her first husband died shortly after they began their relationship due to excessive drinking. Left alone to raise their child, Nation developed a hatred of alcohol and the domestic problems it was causing around the country. She took matters into her own hands when local saloons ignored the new alcohol bans imposed by the government and founded the Women's Christian Temperance Union in 1874, which fought against alcohol before Prohibition even began. Nation attacked the nation with a hatchet, convinced that she was following God's orders. She carried out what she referred to as hatchetations, by traveling from speakeasy to speakeasy and using her hatchet, which had the words "Death to Rum" engraved on the handle, to destroy bottles and other bar fixtures. Sometimes she would travel with a group of women that would sing hymns to accompany her smashing, which somehow makes it more terrifying. She was arrested more than 30 times for her hatchets, and she eventually started publishing a newspaper called The Hatchet about quitting drinking. She died shortly after she collapsed on stage while delivering a terrifying lecture about the dangers of alcohol. We don't necessarily believe in ghosts, but if you're ever drinking too much in a bar and suddenly hear a bunch of women singing hymns, run. Carrie Nation has returned. Moonshine was a way to beat attacks as well as a way to poison yourself. Moonshine first began as a way for people in rural areas to produce their own whiskey. After the Revolutionary War, it became a way to avoid the recently established alcohol tax. It was also huge during Prohibition because there's no way people were going to suddenly give up their drinking. It was known by many names: Firewater, White Lightning, Mountain Dew, Hooch, but the moniker Moonshine comes from the way the farmers made it in secret, by the light of the moon. Another reason the government was concerned was that making moonshine was completely unregulated. There was no limit on how much alcohol it contained, and the brewers could use anything they wanted. A bad batch could result in blindness or even death if a mistake was made. Man, people really wanted their booze back then, regardless of the risk. However, moonshine's surprising inventions didn't just include accidental poison. Bootleggers created NASCAR. With all the moonshine being illegally produced in the early 1900s, there was a huge need for drivers to distribute the product. Men would trick out their cars, making the engines more powerful and adding secret storage compartments to carry the White Lightning. These bootleggers became extremely skilled at outrunning the police and developed into excellent drivers. Not surprisingly, they began to practice with each other and compete in backwoods races. Eventually, the car races began to take shape into a real organization. NASCAR was founded in 1948, and almost every driver, mechanic, and car owner had been involved in bootlegging in some form. Since the beginning of the United States, alcohol has been a part of prison life. The practice of selling alcoholic beverages to inmates, which originated in Europe, was brought to the United States by early settlers. Some of the founding fathers began discussing prison reform in the 1780s and questioned the extent to which alcohol sales were affecting the prison population. Before the reforms were made, the prison system in Philadelphia was considered to be a bit broken. Instead of protecting the prisoners from each other, the guards sold them alcohol. According to the Smithsonian, it was up to 20 gallons per day. Although rules have changed a lot since then, prisoners throughout history have become extremely creative with making prison hooch after the sales from the guards stopped.